Welcome to Read with Pride Northwest. My name is Misha Stone, and I'm a Reader Services Librarian here at the Central Library. And the library is so pleased to be partnering again with Old Growth Northwest and Gay City to provide a free public event for readers and writers. This is part of our Seattle Writes programming, which is continuing through December. Free workshops, some really amazing and talented instructors, so take a look at that schedule. And this is made possible by the Seattle Public Library Foundation that makes so many of our free public programs possible. We also want to thank the Friends of the Library who also make so many of our programs possible. And I want to mention just a couple orders of business. As you notice, this door, this big scary door just closed. The ways that you can get out of this space when you need to is through the door here through the Children's Center. Thank you for gesturing. So many wonderful volunteers. And also through the auditorium door back here. And in fact, I want to let you know that through the duration of this program, we are offering access to gender-neutral restrooms behind this auditorium, so just right back this way. You can also go out the children's door and around just behind the auditorium. There are staff there to show you where they are. There are yellow gender-neutral bathroom signs on those doors, just because it's a staff area, so you go down that hallway and you wonder where you are, but you will find them, and we will help you find them. And I just want to thank you all for coming out today on a day that it is already snowing a little bit again. So thank you for making your way here and celebrating Read with Pride Northwest with us. I am now going to hand this over to the amazing consummate planner, Tracy Timmons-Gray, who makes this possible.
How's everyone doing today? Woo! Can you believe this is our 5th year? We've been doing this for 5 years. Oh my God! There might be some of you who might be like, wait a minute, this is the first time I've heard of Read with Pride Northwest. Well, you're right. That's because we had a different name before. For years 1 through 4, we were named Gay Romance Northwest. And then last year, we did a whole thing where we changed our name and you did a poll and did all the things because we're like, gosh, our name could be like 15,000 times more queer inclusive of the full queer spectrum. And we came up with our new name, Read with Pride Northwest. And there's actually some special meaning behind it because one of our earlier keynotes was actually called Read with Pride. And we have even 2 of our keynoters, Jessica Blatt and Austin Chan, are here tonight who are part of that Read with Pride keynote. And it just felt like so fitting to name, give that our new name, and really celebrate the awesomeness of reading LGBTQIA romance fiction and genre fiction. So, yes, so thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate it. We know you have a lot of things you could have done on your Saturday, and we're just so happy to be here to celebrate these stories with you. I'm going to thank our partners. Misha already did this a little bit, but we're going to do it again because partnership makes the world go round. First, a big shout out to Old Growth Northwest for being our hosting organization all these 5 years. So a big, let's do a clap for them. A big shout out for the Seattle Public Library. They've been a fantastic partner. Woo! And the always amazing Gay City, Seattle's LGBTQ Center. Another thing that helps the world go round are sponsorships. So I'm just going to do a quick shout out for our awesome publishers that help sponsor this event and help make it happen today. So I'm going to ask to do a big hand for each because they're all awesome and powerful and so valuable for us. So first, big hand for Blind Eye Books. Big hand for Bold Strokes Books. Woo! Big hand for Less Than 3 Press. And a big hand for Riptide Publishing. They really... So thank you so much to our sponsors for making today happen. Next up, we're like, what is Read with Pride? What are we here for? And our main mission with Read with Pride Northwest is to celebrate the awesomeness of LGBTQIA romance fiction and genre fiction. That is our mission, because these books and these stories, the authors that write them, the readers that read them, they're awesome, and we should celebrate them more. So that's why we exist in this space today. We've been doing the conference now since 2013, right here in the same space, the Seattle Public Library, and it's been a real pleasure to every year come back and continue to celebrate and make spaces for these stories, because as we know, you can't always find them easily in bookstores. At times, they can be difficult to find in libraries. It's so great to be able to peruse the collection here at the Seattle Public Library and find so many titles, LGBTQIA romance fiction and genre fiction, but we really wanted to be here to make that space and make that commitment to visibly celebrate that space. We are the only LGBTQIA romance fiction conference in the Pacific Northwest, and we do have the proud honor of being the only free conference in the United States. So we're super psyched about that. Since one of our main tenets is about financial access to books, so that means getting more books into libraries, getting people more access to books, so people who really want these stories can find ways to get them. Other ways that we do our work, we do public reading events, such as at our partner Gay City or at Seattle Public Library. Sometimes we'll invade other conventions, that's super fun, and we'll do panels there to talk about queer fiction. And we also do community book drives. We've done this LGBT book drive for Gay City since we started. We've also done a book drive for the queer youth organization Lambert House. And over the past 5 events, thanks to all the wonderful donations that you have brought to these community libraries, we've gathered more than 1,200 books to build up Seattle community libraries and make sure that there's lots of free opportunities for people to find these stories. So a big hand for all of you, because that's because of your donations. So yeah. Also, hey, we have a book too. Last year, our first anthology came out, Magic and Mayhem, thanks to the wonderful efforts of Nicole Kimberling, Samantha Durr, and Amanda Jean. This is a great anthology that is a collection of keynotes and essays and original fiction by a wonderful range of Read with Pride authors. So it is available. I do recommend the ebook version because it's way more, it's way cheaper. Just be straightforward. It's way cheaper, so I really recommend the ebook version. You can get it on Smashwords and Amazon. So you might have noticed our theme this year is love for all, and that's really what we felt. We felt really warm and fuzzy about promoting love stories and for everybody across the queer spectrum. And we were just, everyone deserves love. That's really what part of our big theme this year. But we also had a secondary theme. One that may not be showing up, but we really also wanted to show up on our cover, but we really wanted to also talk about it because it's really important to us and to our mission and also to our community. You may be familiar with it because a lot of things have changed since the 2016 conference in September 2016. So you may be familiar with our secondary theme, which is resist. So, you may have heard lots of things have happened in more than the last 12 months for our community. It's been an interesting year. Thank you so much to organizations, to activists, and so many community members that once again fought against the bathroom bill in June to make sure that didn't happen again in Washington State for the 2nd year in a row. So big congratulations to so many activists that stopped that bill. But the problem is, and the thing is that the people keep threatening to bring that back year after year. So it really shows us that no matter how much we fight, we still have a lot to continue to fight for. And probably one of the most frustrating things for our community is no matter how much ground we've gained, it really feels like over the last year that we're fighting for what we've already got just to protect it. And then also we've seen a lot of rollbacks, whether it's for our trans service members, for our queer youth, for our queer community members with disabilities, for our trans community siblings, for our queer and trans communities of color. There's been a lot happening, and there's a lot for us to do. And so thank you so much for being here, because you may not always think of yourself as a literary activist, but you are. Thank you so much for the stories that you write, for reading these stories, for recommending them to others, for publishing them, getting them at the library. There's so many ways that we can continue to promote visibility and to make sure that we tell people that these stories, but not just these stories are valuable, but as are our lives. And so thank you so much for continuing to push back, to resist together, because it's really, That's what's going to have to keep happening. So let's do that together. And I really thank you and feel deep gratitude for you being here today. And also thank you for Tenderheart for looking so angry in this image. But I have a wonderful pleasure of introducing you to our keynoters for this year, Tobi Hill-Meyer and Rebekah Weatherspoon. And I'm going to invite Tobi and Rebekah to come on up on these beautiful purple chairs. He's going to read us some short bios. Tobi Hill-Meyer was named number 3 in Velvet Park Media's list of the 25 most significant queer women in 2010, and is one of the few people in the world who can claim being both an award-winning porn creator and a children's book author. She is a multiracial trans woman with well over a decade of experience working with feminist and LGBTQ organizations, and currently serves on the board of Gender Justice League, as well as working on a communications director at Gay City, Seattle's LGBTQ center. With her background in activism, she operates her own media production company, Handbasket Productions, creating stories and entertainment that reflect community needs and values, including her erotic documentary series, Doing It Online, as well as her 2017 anthology, Nerve Endings, the new Trans Erotic. So thank you for Tobi for being here. I'm also happy to introduce Rebekah Weatherspoon. Award-winning author Rebekah Weatherspoon was raised in southern New Hampshire and now lives in Southern California. Your weather's much better than ours right now. Where she finally found her love for writing romance. Most recently, her queer paranormal romance, Soul to Keep, book 3 in the Vampire Sorority Sister series, won the Lambda Literary Award for Best LGBTQ Erotica. Thank you both for being here today. So, take it away, Tobi.
Well, I'd like to start off just by saying that when I was asked to interview you, it was a moment of great serendipity because I got to be on the Lambda Literary Award jury that selected your book for the award, which meant that I got to like go pretty deep into your work and have debates about it and that kind of stuff. I did sign a non-disclosure agreement, so I can't talk about that process, but I can talk about my own reflections.
You can tell me afterwards.
Yeah, let's meet up.
Yeah.
Cool. So I did want to start off with one thing from Soul to Keep that left a really big impression on me.
Yeah, go ahead.
There was this one line, and I wrote it down here, where the main character says, "I don't have many ex-lovers. I have current lovers and lovers I haven't slept with in a while. And dead lovers." And there's something about that that just really resonates. I mean, first of all, because that's kind of the style of lovers I have.
Okay. All right.
But like, so in context, the character's a vampire, and there's the common trope of outliving your mortal lovers.
Yes.
But in queer community, like, death is something that we often have to deal with.
Yes.
Whether from like suicide or HIV or violence or poverty. And it just really struck me as something that like speaks a truth about our communities.
Yeah.
That we live with dead lovers. And I wanted to ask you your thoughts around that particular framing, and also just the idea in general about putting pieces of truths for our community into your work like that.
Sure. So, okay, it's always interesting to hear people's take on your work. When I started writing the vampire series, I was approaching it. It's hard for me to frame my own queerness because I think, not to sound corny, but when you're born this way, your brain doesn't know anything else. So this is what my brain knows. My brain knows that I'm a black woman, I'm a black queer woman, And so when I sat down to frame the entire vampire world, I was thinking of this multicultural group of vampires and how they would treat young women. So they would want a really inclusive, safe, loving space. The character who says those words, Miyoko, she's been through a lot. She's been alive almost 100 years. She survived the bombing of Nagasaki. She's been through a lot. And she is dealing with the loss of a lover who is not dead and is actually in that sea, and she's confronted with her ex-lover. And I think she, throughout her journey in that book, is trying to find her own place in an established community. And I think that's one thing as queer people, we're, even within the community, are still trying to find our perfect fit.
Yeah, I also wanted to ask you, one of the projects you've been doing is the Women of Color Romance Tumblr. And I wanted to just ask you to speak to that a little bit about like why you created that, why we need that, and also like what response has it had, and how has it, what impact have you seen it have?
So when I first started writing romance, one weird thing that would happen is I would be at writers' conferences and white writers would be talking to me and tell me that they didn't know any black authors who wrote romance while they were talking to me. So that was weird. It was kind of strange. And that was something I was hearing a lot, that black women were not writing romance. And then the other thing that I was hearing was that black people don't read books. So that was really weird. Please don't be shocked. You know who our president is. Let's not feign the shock. Let's not feign the shock. So Black History Month of 2013, I thought, well, why don't I highlight some black romance authors? And I'll do, 10 or so every week. And I thought it would be a daunting task, but it wasn't. Thanks to the internet, I found a lot of authors really fast. And by the end of the month, I had over, 100 authors, and I didn't have to look that hard. It wasn't that difficult. So after the month was over, I wanted to find more authors of color. And so I thought, well, why don't I start a website and a Twitter and a Tumblr where I can create a database where people can just go to find the books. So kind of clear away all the clutter. And if you are looking for a paranormal romance, or you're looking for a romantic comedy, or you're looking for a queer YA, all you have to do is go to the website and click YA, click LGBT, and you're gonna find a book written by a woman of color. And it just seemed kind of like a no-brainer. And so far, the reception has been wonderful. One thing I'm tickled by is when someone tweets, oh, I can't find any books by women of color. 5 seconds later, 10 people are like, well, did you try women of color in romance? And I love that. I think it's amazing. This is the power of the internet, and I was able to harness it for good. So hopefully it grows. Every week we share between 12 and 20 new releases every week. And that's not all I find every week. I find about 30 every week, but I have to spread that out. And again, that's not with a ton of digging. That's like basic Amazon search, basic Google search, hitting up the standard publishers. It doesn't take very long. It's not very hard, and people are finding authors, and it's great.
So, what would you say are some of the barriers in any aspect of from like getting things published to working with publishers to working with bookstores or anywhere? What barriers are there that are preventing us from having the representation we would like to see?
Okay, I'm gonna get real serious for a minute, so let's get comfortable. I work in a bookstore too, so I work part-time at the Rip Bodice in LA, if anyone's familiar with that bookstore. It's layers, but once you're kind of in it, it's very visible layers. So what happens at a publishing house, usually when someone starts a publishing house, They hire people they know through personal contacts. So what ends up happening once you've kind of built your team is that you often end up with a bunch of people who look like you. And if that keeps going for years and years and years, and sometimes decades and decades and decades, what you've done is cultivated everywhere from editorial to marketing to whoever's in the mailroom, all the way up to the top, looks like you. There's one publisher, well, I'll just say the name, it's Harlequin, it's fine. If you go to their publishing spotlights at conferences, it seems like you're in a room with a group of women who are very good friends. The problem is you have to somehow become their friend. And that's very hard to do when you're an overweight queer black woman. It's hard to somehow get into that friend group. So unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but this year the Rip Bodice released a diversity study, and the focus for this study was looking at race across the publishing community. They included Riptide, they included Bold Strokes, they included Dreamspinner, they included Bella Books, they included queer publishers, and the numbers for people of color were abysmally low across the board. And the reason for that is because even at queer publishers, it's people who look like you. So when you're trying to get queer work into the mainstream or trying to get queer color of work into the mainstream, you're dealing with people who don't look like you. And it's very, very hard to find people who, I hate the phrase taking a chance because it's like not really taking a chance. People buy books all the time. People get really stubborn and they get really possessive over the work and what they're putting out, so they don't want to let outsiders in. So that's the main barrier, is getting people to stop just working with people who look like them.
I know that oftentimes my own experiences with publishing or just trying to fit my work into someone else's box, I'll give an example where my partner is also a writer, and he's written a variety of different pieces and would try to get them published in different places. And when you have like a character when you have a collection of characters where there are relationships between men, relationships between women, relationships between men and women, then suddenly like you try and pitch that to a lesbian press and they're like, no, and you pitch that to a straight press and they're like, oh my God, no. And and since everything is so segmented into niches, like you have to fit somebody else's niche. And one of the things that I've been finding is more and more with the tools of self-publishing being more accessible. I've actually seen a lot of people like self-publish their own book and then say, hey, I can do this, and then they start self-publishing their friends' books, and then they're a publisher. And it's when I get my books published, it's usually with people who are essentially using the self-publishing tools, and it's like one or two people doing it. And those are some of the ways that I've found to kind of like build our own alternative where we can get in there, but it still can be really limiting. The self-publishing tools don't allow you to reach an audience the same way the existing publishing infrastructure does. So I wanted to ask you, what solutions or workarounds have you found that you're able to use to get what you want out there?
Nothing. I mean, I don't have what I want right now. I don't. I mean, I think.
Well, let's talk about that. Can I ask you, like, what in the work that you are getting out is not what you want? How would you do it differently if you had free reign?
So I feel like I'm writing what I want to be writing, for sure. And that's why I'm not getting past some of those hurdles. I don't feel like I'm watering down my work. I don't feel like I'm changing anything about my work. And that's why I am doing a lot of self-publishing and working with small presses right now. My biggest thing as a writer is I'm constantly worried about the youths. I'm worried about the children. Being a young person is very, very hard, and not having accessible media that either reflects you or reflects a hint of something that you feel inside of yourself is very damaging. And even for myself, I wish mainstream media would embrace more faces and more voices, because I think it's doing damage to a lot of audiences. So I haven't figured out a reach around. I haven't. Sorry about that. I haven't figured out a workaround yet. I think, unfortunately, when it comes to mainstream publishing, you need someone who's willing to open a door for you. And I would love for a mainstream publisher to pick up, an own voices piece, one for young people, so queer young kids can see themselves. I think Love, Simon is coming out next year, so that's fantastic. But we need more. And then I also would love to see more coming-of-age, positive queer work for adults. And I think one of the most traumatic things about being an adult is that you're told that you're gonna get over things or grow up at a certain point. And then you're 30, 40, 50, and you're like, I am still struggling with things. I'm still struggling with my life. I'm struggling with experiences. I'm struggling with my emotions. And I think there's a massive lack of stories that aren't necessarily traumatic and dark and, issues, but just, I would love to see a rom drama where a queer person changes jobs and falls in love. That would be awesome. So I think the gatekeepers need to start opening their minds and letting some of us in the door.
So if not mainstream publishing, where have you gotten your work? What has, it's not everything, but what has been working for you?
I think, to be completely honest, I think what's been working best for me is telling positive stories, and telling positive stories from an authentic, uplifting place. I have a story that came out in, I think, 2014 called Treasure that was just featured on Shondaland yesterday. The book's almost 4 years old at this point. Thank you. And it was featured in Cosmo over the summer and all this stuff. And to me, it's wonderful, but it's also showing me that there's not a lot of positive love stories for queer Black girls out there. That a book that I wrote 3, 4, or 5 years ago is still getting that kind of buzz because there's not much else. There are stories out there, but there's not enough. So that's been working in the sense that I'm one of few voices, but I'd rather be lost in a big crowd than be, you know what I mean? I think I'd be happier if there was more voices than just a few.
Yeah. So one of the areas where a lot of my focus has been is around trans representation. And so definitely that whole trying to find representation and whatever experience you're trying to get at, there's all of these kinds of tropes that we have to deal with. And I think that what you were saying about having things with, happy endings and good, positive, uplifting stories, especially for trans stories, but kind of all LGBTQ stories, there's this history of the characters die. And in fact, I remember reading one of my favorite short stories focusing around trans character, and I loved this dynamic where there was a cis character. It's a gritty noir gangster, and there's the cis boyfriend who's ready to fight and die for her, and there's so much about that was really awesome, and then they all die, and it was just wow, what a punch to the gut. and it's like, oh, well, you did die for her, and then she died too, and so you know, when I'm always having an eye for those kinds of things, one of the things that really stood out to me when I was reading through 30 or 40 books last year for the Lambda Literary Awards was that out of all of the books that I ended up reading, there was only one book that had a trans woman in a sex scene, and maybe 3 books that had trans women as side characters somewhere. And in Soul to Keep, there is a trans woman character, and there's actually like a little side plot about creating a sex ed curriculum and how to make that sex ed curriculum trans inclusive. That really stuck out to me. And then at the same time, that character is not involved in the sex scenes or a lot of the larger plot dynamics. So I wanted to ask you about your experience in writing trans representation, and like how that's working for you, and again, and what plans. I think when we got to talk earlier, you mentioned that you had some kind of other works that you were thinking around how you were going to be doing trans representation.
So when I think of inclusion in any sense, my main goal is writing love stories. That's my main goal. I don't write mysteries. I don't write, issues books where it's like, some big community thing that needs to be overcome. I write love stories. So to me, it's not difficult to be inclusive of people. I'm like a really sensitive, mushy person. And I want everyone to find love, whether it's romantic love or like platonic love or just being surrounded by people who care about you. Like, I want everyone to have that kind of love and support. So to me, in being inclusive is like kind of a no-brainer. I wrote my first trans character in At Her Feet, which is BDSM romance, another side character. I fucked that up. I fucked it up real bad. And I heard about it. People emailed me and said, thanks for trying, but you kind of fucked this up. And I learned a lesson. And when I got those emails telling me I screwed up, my initial reaction was like, I don't want to hurt readers with my books. That is not something, I don't want anyone to pick up one of my books and be like, well, that really stung. And I'm sure someone picked up that book and was like, well, she fucked this up and will never read one of my books again. And that's okay, because I screwed up. But moving forward, I still want trans people to be included in my books. I want non-binary people to be included in my books. I want everyone to be included. So I tried again, and when Jill's trying to come up with her, curriculum in the sorority, there's a girl named Taylor in the sorority who's transgender, and she's a part of the group. She's in all the, fun orgies they have at the sorority house. And then I wrote another book about a bisexual black girl, and she met Afro-Cuban black woman at her job who's also transgender, and they're best friends throughout the whole trilogy. And she was the most, her name's Daniela, and she was the most loved character in the series. All the feedback I got, I love Kayla, I love Michael, they were the leads, but I got so much feedback about Daniela because I think I made her a happy person who was surrounded by people who cared about her. So she got to be the friend who didn't get thrown under the bus. Also, I basically gave her a love interest who was Bruno Mars. And so people were like, oh, it's kind of cool. I didn't sidekick her, and I gave her a love life, and I gave her like a kind of cool love life. And I'm gonna write her own book. She's gonna get her own book. A lot of people have been asking for it, and I know moving forward, my job isn't to write this massive tome about the trans experience. My job is to write a romantic comedy for a woman who is transgender. And I need to treat her the way I treat all the other women that I write. She gets to have fun. She's going to shed some tears. She's going to run around with her girlfriends. They're going to go to some basketball games and some concerts. She's going to have some good sex. She's going to fall in love. And I think when we're trying to write outside of our experience, as long as we keep it to the core of what we're trying to write and not try to make it something else. So I'm trying to write love stories, and I think if I stick to that, I'll get better at the inclusivity.
I love the example of that progression, because I think a lot of times there's this hesitancy to write outside of your experience, and I definitely hear that from white writers who are really afraid of writing characters of color. That there's this kind of like, well, they feel like they need to, like it would be bad not to, but they're worried that if they do, they're gonna fuck it up. And it's like, no, you just do it, and yeah, you're gonna fuck it up, but like then you get feedback, you learn, you progress, and you do things differently.
Well, and I also think for white writers, it depends on why you want to write those stories. I know a lot of writers in recent years have written those stories because they thought they were supposed to, not because they wanted to. If you don't want to be inclusive, like, that's fine. People will still buy your books. But be inclusive from a genuine place. Don't come at it from, I think this is going to sell more, or some phantom voice in my head is telling me I have to do this. I don't write inclusively because I feel like I have to. I write inclusively because I want to. I want to see all kinds of people falling in love. I don't feel like this isn't hard, painful work for me. This is joyful work for me. And I think that's the difference. A lot of times when white authors write, even queer white authors, I know the first black character they wrote was on drugs. And none of their white characters before that were on drugs. So why all of a sudden is your first black character on drugs? And it's a very weird thing. I mean, even in hetero mainstream romance, a lot of people write when they go to writing inclusively, it's like, oh, well, I'm going to write a Native American character who's an alcoholic. I'm going to write a black character who's a crack baby. Like, it's like, I don't know where this is coming from, but it's very interesting to see when it's the inclusivity comes in. It's like, okay, let me pick the worst trope. Let me kill the trans character off. Let me do something horrible, because that's all I think of these people who are not like me. So if that's the way you're going, maybe rethink it.
I mean, it's true, and it's that kind of double-edged sword that like we'd like folks to try, fuck up, and learn, but we also don't want to deal with their fuck up, right? And it's like when I was putting together my anthology, Nerve Endings, like right into the call for submissions, I said, please don't send me a story with an all-white cast of characters, and still I got a lot of them. But then also I got a decent amount of stories where I kind of like took a step back and I'm like, did you like hear what I said and like just made this one character a person of color, and now I'm not exactly liking how you wrote that character. And it's tricky.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a part of craft too. I think it's a part of craft. I think it's a part of character development. I think it's a part of understanding people. I think, the phrase "stay in your lane" is a valuable phrase. I mean, again, what's been working for me is staying in my lane. I don't need to write every story. I write a story that I think I can write well. And I think, again, people just need to take that into consideration when they're writing something. There's nothing wrong with writing all white characters. I think the problem comes in when publishers are only publishing one kind of story. Like, writers can write one kind of story. There's plenty of white authors who write like really white shit that I like, that I'm totally into. I'm like, this is the whitest, straightest thing I've ever read, but like, it's really cute and I'm into it. Like, I love cheesy small town romances, bring them on, I love them. And I wouldn't want those authors to then turn around and start writing about like a young black kid playing basketball on the internet. Like, no. Stay doing what you're doing. And I think it's just publishers need to switch up what they're putting out. Not necessarily authors don't always have to switch up what they're writing.
So you mentioned the one new book that you're working on. Like, tell us a bit about some of the projects you're working on. What's coming up next for you?
Okay, I showed my friend my list of books I want to write, and at the time it was 48 books, and then I like my problem is that I come up with books in like 3s or 4. I don't come up with like a book. I'll be like, oh, well, I'll write one book, and then 9 books later, I'm like, ah, shit. I started a romantic suspense series the first one came out in April. That's going to be 5 books, and over the course of writing it, I've already come up with 3 spinoffs, and I'm like, ugh. So I'm hoping to finish those 5 and just step back from that. And then from there, I have, let's see, Black Cowboys coming up. I want to write at least 3 new adult stories with queer women of color. I want to write a YA book with Black girls that are queer. And I also want to do kind of a space trilogy with queer women as well. That's like the first like 12. So that's like the first 12. So that's where we're all headed.
All right. Well, we'll be looking out for them.
Thank you.
I want to turn and open it up now for questions. So we've got a bit of time for a Q&A. Is there anyone who would like to ask either of us a question? Oh, okay, I see a hand here. We'll run up a mic to you.
Okay. Harass the shit out of them. No, I'm not kidding. Okay. So here's the thing I love about Twitter and email and all this stuff. First thing you do is harass them. And go to all your favorite mainstream publishers who are putting out your favorite books, HarperCollins, anyone, tweet them. Be like, hey, like I really, or also what you really could do, like any of the authors here that you like, tweet those publishers and be like, you know what, you should pick up a book by this author. I think it would do really well. Or you could like quote tweet them with like, oh, I picked up this new book. It would be really great if you guys carried something like this. Publishers follow the money. And if you've noticed, like a lot of television film is starting to include more Black people. It needs to start including people of other races, but slow and steady, whatever. But slowly, there's being more Black stories coming out. It's because the money. Last year, Luke Cage crashed Netflix. Okay, it crashed Netflix. And they wanted to act like Stranger Things and all these other shows had brought that kind of viewership to Netflix. It was Luke Cage. And that is a very Black show. If you have not watched Luke Cage, they shoot the barbershop scenes across the street from my aunt's house in Harlem. That's a Black-ass neighborhood. It's a very, very Black show, but it's authentically Black. And so that's why Black viewers really enjoyed it. But on top of that, it's a really good show. So all of these other viewers came to watch it. So if publishers can get their hands on the work and then get their hands on the good work, the money comes right afterwards. So as readers, if you can show them that you're willing to cough up the money, then they will start buying the stories.
I would also say that the more you can hook with some kind of connection that, yes, shows that you're spending money, shows that you're not just a wild critic appeared randomly, but that you're like engaged and interested in their work. So like find some of the publishers who have done some work that you do like, but you might notice things that are lacking, and then like get on their mailing lists. And like get connected into what they're doing. Sometimes they'll put out like reader surveys, and then in those reader surveys, they'll ask you what you want. I actually, you mentioned Netflix. Like 2 weeks ago, I randomly got an email from Netflix asking me to fill out a survey for them. It was like a half-hour survey, and I like really went in depth on some of those things of like, first off, like mentioning what they had that I did, like Luke Cage, and then like why I liked it, and they picked some random show they knew I had watched, and they were like, what did you like about this one? And I'm like, I liked it when they confronted teenage sexual assault. And then on top of that, like, started actually, name dropping and mentioning, like, I heard about the whole controversy where you had a cis guy do a documentary about Marsha P. Johnson. Meanwhile, there's trans women of color making a movie about Marsha P. Johnson. Why don't you pick that up? And so being able to, like, show that you're engaged and connected, and sometimes do that compliment sandwich where you're like, I love this book, it's lacking this thing, it would be great if you did this. But like, if you can engage in that way and do name drop and make specific connections to like, not just like you should have a trans book, but like, oh my God, this trans author, this one is so awesome, follow their work. Those kinds of things.
Also, another really important thing to do is buy the books yourselves too. One thing I do, I don't have time to read every single book. I don't think any of us do. I buy so many books and don't read them, but that counts as a sale for the author, and it counts to like their ranking and all of that stuff. So buy books even if you think you might not read them. Gift books to people. That's the other thing. You can give books as gifts. Buy books and donate them to the library. Donate them to a children's center. There's women's shelters that needs books. You can give books all over the place. So even if you're not going to read them, buy them. It counts as a sale for the author. You're putting money in their pocket right away. Then get online, tell people you bought it. That's the other thing. I think a lot of people think when they share books, they have to have read them. That's not the case. I will tweet, I'm serious, I will tweet all the time, I'm interested in this book. I started an impromptu book club one day on Twitter by accident, just because I saw a book and I was like, oh, this book looks cool, who wants to read it with me? And then like 5 minutes later, like 15 people were like, okay, I bought the book, let's read it. And I didn't do it on purpose, but that's what I'm saying, that kind of thing. If you just tell people, oh, I'm interested in this book, more people will go out and buy it.
And one more thing, and then I know there's another question, but I think oftentimes publishers come at this from the idea that like whatever, that people only read books about them. And so if you're looking at a marginalized population, then they think only the people from that marginalized population are going to read it. And not only is that a much smaller audience, but it's often an audience with less access to money. Yes. So again, like if you can buy those books and then like give them away to friends, and like especially if you are connected into communities where people don't have that opportunity super often, like buy the books that then give them the books, and then it's like a win-win.
So I have a question. It kind of goes back to you having so many books to write. I've got an issue of the fact that when I start a series, and you obviously know there's more books to come out, no matter what the genre is, no matter who the characters are, what color they are, whatever, the authors stop writing them. Do you have...
Did you say the authors stop writing them?
Stop writing them as in they stop writing the future books of the series. So it's like, do you have a way for us to encourage authors to finish a series without sounding rude?
Listen, I don't know what would work. I think the other authors in this room can tell you, like, we're delicate creatures. And sometimes we get to a point where the series, like the vampire series is not done yet. And a lot of people are emailing me and they're like, when's the book coming out? I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to finish it because I feel like I owe readers a conclusion, but that's just my personal thing. Sometimes, depending on if it's put out with a publisher or not, sometimes there's like beef with the editor or something happened with the publisher or like something happened, so continuing the series is just like a painful exercise for the author. Sometimes it's just not working. I think the best thing you can do is just tell them you liked the book and hope. Because I know, like there's authors that I want sequels and all kind of stuff. But now that I'm in it, oh, the struggle. You start a series. I mean, I'm on book 2 of a series right now, and I'm like, I gotta get to 5. And my friend she wrote 8 books in a series. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Kit Rocha and the Beyond series, but like they wrote 8 in one series, and they're gonna roll 9 in another. I don't know how they did it, but series are hard. So just be gentle, be nice, be encouraging.
It's actually
I was just curious about Goodreads. Is that a tool that you've used to get the word out about some of these books?
I personally don't use Goodreads mostly because I'm a little lazy. My main social media spot is Twitter. But that's what works best for me. I know some authors like Facebook is their home. That's what works best for them. And then there's some people where Goodreads is where they live, and that's a great place. I have a hard time with Goodreads because that's where the reviews are. And for my sanity, I need to stay away, especially if I just released a book, because I go and I'm like, how many people have reviewed this? I can read reviews, but if I'm trying to keep going on my next project, I need to stay away from reviews. I think Goodreads is a good place if you want to make sure your book is on like certain lists, make sure it gets in certain categories, but I think it's kind of an individual thing to see what works best for you.
I definitely like the list function on Goodreads, and if I'm trying to create a list on my own web page, then it's just, there's a lot of like, okay, well, I've got all the titles and the dates they're published and like the links to where you can buy them, and with Goodreads, I just need to be like, here's the title of the book, and it plugs all the rest of it in. So I do appreciate that piece. There's also a nice element of being able to collectively create lists, and so like there's one list that's like science fiction and fantasy by trans authors, and there's a couple hundred books on it, and I appreciate
they're
that.
not hard to find if you just look.
And so yeah, like that's what I kind of like really appreciate it, and kind of documenting. Like I remember that moment when I went back and I was like, you know, I should make sure that all of my books are on my Goodreads page. And so getting that kind of like, yeah, documenting and collecting information can be pretty useful there. And then also, you know, reviews can be their whole thing, but I really appreciate getting them, and I think that having people write reviews is another way that you can really help promote works. And so I always invite people to write reviews on Goodreads and Amazon, because like those places, they have computer metrics that will actually look at those reviews and then like rate things and make them more visible, and like it actually counts and impacts how the book gets out there.
Mine is not totally so much a question as in more relating to something you guys had mentioned earlier about inclusion of different aspects of something that's not you, but something outside of yourself. I've actually tended to notice that there, like you were saying, that there's not a lot of women of color, and you were saying not a lot of trans and stuff like that. And I've noticed as a reader that I'm actually getting bored. And I'm a very curious person. I use books as kind of a learning experience for stuff that I don't get a chance to experience for myself. And I guess my question would be, what would you suggest?
You are not alone in this boat. I have gotten very bored with a lot of stuff too. My reading habits have gotten real weird because I've gotten so bored that, right, so I've been looking for like really weird shit like alien shifter orgy stuff, just because I want something that's like weird and outside the box to like keep me awake. Not that there's anything wrong with cops and lawyers, but like I cannot pick up another lesbian romance about cops and lawyers. I've hit my cops and lawyers limit. It's the truth. I've hit my cops and lawyers limit. And I think it's one thing I've noticed about indie publishing, which is also very difficult, is a lot of people who started writing independently and self-publishing 4 or 5 years ago are burnt out because they didn't make any money, and writing for free is very, very hard. One of my favorite authors, who's a black woman who writes lesbian romance, she had to stop writing because she had to go back to her regular job. And I'm like, every once in a while, I'll hit her up and ask her if she's going to write another book, and she said she's working on it. But it's this weird cycle of like, if there's not enough money put into it. And again, this is another reason why it's so important for mainstream publishers to pick up these books, because they have the money to pay someone a living wage to write them. That's the main thing. If authors aren't being paid a living wage, they can't put out books to keep up with reader demand. So what I've been doing is, going to Goodreads list and like clawing through and digging and trying to find stuff that's outside of the box. So I would try sites like Goodreads. You can go on Tumblr and kind of do really specific searches. Tumblr is actually pretty good with like weird fandom stuff where they'll be good. Well, maybe that'll cue your boredom. But I think it's just a matter of kind of digging and really, really looking, because a lot of the surface stuff it's a lot of the same stuff, unfortunately. So you're not alone in the kind of getting bored with some of the stuff that's out there.
I'd also say, like, keep an eye out on those mediums that people use when they can't go through big publishers. Like, I have found a ton of great works on Kickstarter that I didn't know about until I, saw the Kickstarter for it. Like, honestly, like, there's not a ton on Kickstarter if you just use a search term for a community that you'd like to see representation of. You'll only see a couple of things, so like check once a month or something like that. And then Goodreads and various other places where people are talking about different works. I know there's going to be a session right after this about reading recommendations, so you can pay attention to that. Also, like, a lot of people who can't get their works published traditionally will do like self-publishing ebooks. So looking specifically in those areas can be helpful. And then, of course, I've got to plug my own work. Nerve Endings, the new Trans Erotic, was specifically designed to be very different and new. It's the new Trans Erotic. It's got everything from a trans woman raising her nephew in a zombie apocalypse to space orcs confronting their childhood sexual assault triggers. So that's a fun one. There's a little postcard for it that's in your grab bag, so take a look at that. And also on the back, if you are around Seattle in May, I'm going to be doing a one-woman play about a trans superhero turned villain who tries to take over the world. So you can take a look at both of those things in your grab bag.
Yeah, definitely dig. I mean, I found, before I was even introduced to Tobi, I found Nerve Endings online. So you just gotta look, you just gotta dig. But it's out there, it really is. There's a lot of people writing really great stuff. You just gotta dig for it, unfortunately. Girl, get in there and dig. You can do it. Get in there and dig.
All right, well that's our time. So let's turn this back to Tracy.
Can we give them a big hand?